Your life can be full of inspiration and magic, and you don't need glass slippers to get there. Welcome to the podcast for real life heroines with author, speaker, and coach, Susanna Liller. Join us as we work with key elements of personal development to assist you in hearing the calls that life has for you. Be inspired, be empowered, and be encouraged. Let's start today's episode with your host, Susanna Liller.
Hello, everyone. I am very pleased to be here with you with my guest, Susanne Evans, who has been a friend for a while. I got to be on her wonderful podcast. Susanne, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And you all know that what I most love to do on this show is to talk to people, talk to women about their heroine's journey, and most specifically about what got them on the journey. What was their call, and how was it to hear that call, and was it tough to answer it? And we're going to talk about that with Susanne. And actually, we're going to have a conversation about two of her calls. But before we go there, let me just say a few things about you, Susanne, and also know that there'll be in the show notes, everyone, more information. But just so you know, who is this woman with this most charming accent? She is in Birmingham now, right? Birmingham, England, yes. Across the pond. And she spent quite a while, 10 years, in Big Four consultancy firms, where she saw firsthand the difficulty that leaders face with change and getting people to change, and large scale transformation, how it could really be great and how it could be very hard. And then she left that world, and we're going to hear more about that. And she founded her own consulting business in 2007, helping her clients lead change in what she calls a more humane and effective way. And then, and this is going to be what we're going to talk about as far as her journey number 2, in 2011, she started a PhD, and she had become interested in the role of stories and storytelling in organizational development and transformation. And she completed that PhD in 2020, 8 years later, and we're going to hear about that. And you know, it's just, Susanne, so great that you're willing to share your stories, because I know there are people listening that, number one, probably are thinking, I want to leave this corporation I'm in and start my own business. And also there's probably people thinking, oh, I'd love to do a PhD or something similar, and oh, I could never do it. So we're going to hear about you. And then, of course, now you write and speak about organization change for the Business Transformation Network, Enterprise Nation, and you host open storytelling workshops, and you are the host of a very popular podcast yourself, Change Stories podcast, in which guests share ideas for improving the world of work. And I was so honored to be on that podcast. And of course, our interest in stories and in storytelling, of course, we would, despite the distance and the water in between, we would connect. So thank you again for being here.
You're so welcome. It's so lovely to see you and to talk to you again.
Well, I would like to start at the end of your heroine's journey. Before we get to the beginning, the second journey, getting the PhD, 8 years, the end, because that's where we last connected when we talked, and you had just gotten back from where?
So I'd been to Greece. So this was October 2021. So I had a week in Greece, which was amazing. Lovely to be able to get there. I mean, it felt like such a privilege actually to be able to travel, given everything.
Right.
But yeah, that's where I had been last time we spoke properly.
And you were celebrating. You had this huge, gargantuan, challenging journey, 8 years getting your PhD, and you took the time to celebrate. And why I love pointing this out is because typical heroine's hero's journey, particularly in literature, the character, the heroine goes through her journey, answers her call, has all these challenges, and at the end celebrates, and Joseph Campbell called it freedom to live. And to me, I always translate that as, oh, I have done it. Now I can be even more of who I always knew I was, but I was afraid to do it. And so it's this feeling of exaltation and collecting your gifts and celebrating the gifts from the journey. Can you relate to that when you were there in Greece?
Definitely. And it was interesting because obviously I finished, I did everything with my PhD, finished it in July 2020. And the plan had always been to go away that August for a couple of weeks to Greece. I love Greece, so it's somewhere I love to go. And we had a villa booked and it was going to be amazing. And then of course COVID got in the way and that all had to be cancelled. And at the time, I was really upset and really disappointed because it felt really important to me that I could have this celebration. And we still had a holiday and it was lovely, but it wasn't what I had thought about throughout. And at various times in doing the PhD, there had been good times and bad times, which I know we'll come on to. Right. But one of the things that got me through the really difficult parts was the idea that at the end of it, there'd be something, a reward, you know, a carrot, a trip to Greece that would make it worthwhile. And I'd done all sorts around that, you know, at a time when I was feeling really low about finishing, whether I'd ever be able to finish it. I'd spoken to a colleague, Dr. Terry Simpkin, who, by the way, is an expert in imposter phenomenon. So if anyone's interested in that, she is the person to go see. And she had done a PhD and we chatted on the phone. And she said what got her through doing hers was creating a vision board of Italy. She loves Italy. And she had photographs of all the places she wanted to go visit. And so the plan would be when she finished to go off and do that. So I did exactly the same thing. I had pictures of places in Greece and I stuck them around my office. And every time that it got a bit difficult and a bit hard, and I thought, I don't know whether I can do this, I reminded myself of what would be at the end. So of course, when that didn't happen, I found it quite difficult actually, and it felt like I hadn't really finished. So I had this sort of year of limbo between July 2020 and July 2021 when I actually managed to have my graduation, and then we went away in the October, and it was interesting to be there because it felt like, as I said at the beginning, it felt like such a privilege to be able to travel, having not traveled for so long. But also it was like a real feeling of ending, that okay, that's done. I can put that to bed now, and then I can move on and do something else.
Right. And so this podcast has always been so focused on the call and listening to the call and what was the journey, but the ending and that reward part is really very important. So that's why I was so happy to hear that you did it. So let's now go back and let's go to the beginning. And I'd love to ask you to talk about journey number one, and particularly again because you know this is the great resignation period. Yeah. People are leaving their jobs, they're reconsidering, and I myself had to leave wanted to leave a big corporate job. I had been there for 12 years. So tell us how you got that call, and I know it was different from your second journey, but just what was that like, the call and leaving, and how hard was it to start your own business?
It's interesting because lots of people have asked me, well, that must have been a really difficult decision. Actually, that decision was not hard because I felt like I had to go. I loved my work. I was working as an HR and change and organisation development consultant with one of the big four. And I loved the job and I loved working with the clients, but I was finding it increasingly difficult. So I think by the time I left, my daughter was 2. So I'd come back from having maternity leave, and everything was the same, and the job was the same, and the sort of the stresses and the pressure was the same, but I was a different person. You know, I wasn't the same as I had been before, but no one treated me as though I was any different. And I knew I couldn't carry on. I didn't want to be the person that I was there. I had lots of people around me who were working parents, and they weren't doing it in a way that I wanted to do it. You know, they didn't see a lot of their children, and that was the kind of expectation for me too. And I just didn't want to be that person. So it was almost like I have to get out of this place. And self-employment was something I'd thought about for a while. And it didn't feel scary because my dad had his own business. So I'd grown up with that, in that world. So it felt quite normal for me. Mm-hmm. And I just remember saying one day to my husband, I'm going to resign on Monday. And he just kind of went, okay, what are you going to do? And I said, oh, I'm going to work for myself. And I'm going to do the same thing, but just for me and in a way that I want to do it. And he just said, fine. If anyone can do it, you can do it. So that was it. And so it wasn't that hard. It felt harder to have stayed. That would have felt harder than to go.
That's that wonderful quote by Anais Nin, that it's harder to stay closed as a bud than to burst into, but you can't not do it. But I'm sure that people listening thinking, oh my gosh, the security and the experience that you had, and you left it behind, but so it paid off though.
It did. Yeah. And I think I said to myself at the beginning, I'm going to give it a year. I'll give myself a year. And if at the end of that year, I hate it, or it hasn't worked out, or I haven't had any work, or, you know, whatever, then I would go back to having a proper job again and do something normal. And, you know, 14 years later, I'm still here.
Still with Feldspar Consulting.
Yes. I mean, things have changed. You know, I do very different work now to what I did at the beginning, but I don't know, I can't explain it. It just felt like something I had to do. I genuinely think, having had that experience as a child of seeing my parents set up a business, and that helped because it made it wasn't unusual, and I had people to ask, and, you know, I could speak to them about it and what they had done, and hugely supportive family, and all of that, which made life a lot easier. But I just knew I couldn't carry on doing what I was doing.
Yeah. So, okay. So there's journey number one, and you're really, in effect, you're still on that one because you still have that business and it worked for you. And then how did the call to this huge project of getting your PhD, where did that come from? How did that materialize inside of your head?
So I think it was about 3 years in. So I'd probably been doing my own thing for about 3 years, and I loved it. You know, I loved the work. I loved the freedom of it. You know, I've learned a big thing for me is freedom and control. And if I feel like I'm not in control, or I don't have freedom, then that's not good for me. So from that sense, it really worked for me being self-employed. I think around about 2010, I started to just feel a bit bored, because I don't know, the work was good, but it was quite similar. You know, I was doing similar projects all the time. And I just started to think, I don't know, I want something else. And I didn't know what that was. And I knew I wanted to study. My husband had finished his MBA a year or so before. And I thought, yeah, I fancy doing something. And I toyed with the idea of actually becoming an acupuncturist, because I have acupuncture for migraines. It's made a huge difference to my life since I was in my early 20s. And I you know, I'm passionate about it, and I thought maybe I could do that. And so I started investigating that. But there was something about it that just wasn't quite right. I don't know why, it just wasn't. And then I remembered a couple of years before, I'd worked on a project where the client had started teaching its senior leaders about communicating through stories. And I can remember there was an article, Robert McKee, Storytelling That Moves People, which actually, if anyone's interested in stories and why they work, look it up. It's in the Harvard Business Review. It's an amazing article.
Let me just have you read. So McKee is his last.
Robert McKee, Storytelling That Moves People, Harvard Business Review. It's just the best article.
You sent me the link for that, and I thought, and it is a wonderful article, and I think maybe we could put that in the story notes, the show notes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's freely available, I think, so you can look it up.
And it was really a catalyst for you.
For sure. But at the time I didn't really realize. I kind of read it and filed it away in the my that's interesting folder, which I'll come back to that later. But it really, I thought that's really interesting, and I saw how well that had worked at that particular organisation in terms of communicating a change of strategy. So I just started doing some reading around stories and change, and I don't know, just what was going on. It kind of piqued my interest, and then more things started kind of popping up. How we know what it's like, you read something and then it leads on to something else, and I started reading more and more stuff, but never at that point did I think I could do anything with it. I just thought it was an interesting thing. And then about that time I was doing some lecturing at the University of Birmingham to talk to their undergraduates about organisation change, and I just got chatting to one of the professors there who was my kind of contact, who I'd known actually since I was in Big Four. And I started to, she said, "Oh, what are you doing at the moment?" And I said, "Oh, I've been doing this, I've been reading about storytelling." And she said, "Oh, that sounds really interesting. Maybe you should do some more study in it." And I kind of went, "Yeah, maybe." And then she said, "You should do a PhD." And I just laughed. I just laughed at her, really? But I never thought I could.
So that never had crossed your brain before then?
No, the only person whose brain it had crossed was my mother's, who actually, when I told her that I was going to do a PhD, she said, "Yeah, I know. I've known that you would do something like that for years." So yeah, no one else's brain it had crossed, but my mother knew.
Didn't your mother have a dream?
She said she had always seen me doing something in academia, and so it was just, she just knew. But she's good like that, my mum. She knows things. So yeah, it was kind of Joe, who then went on to become my supervisor for my PhD, put the idea in my head, and I kind of went home and thought about it and thought, "Oh, well, maybe that sounds interesting." But the more I thought about it, the more excited I got about it. And because, going back to that kind of freedom and control, which is so important to me, I realized I didn't like the idea of someone teaching me. I wanted to go off and learn something myself. So it really fitted, and I felt really excited. So yeah, off I went and just did the research proposal, and it went from there.
What I love about how you tell this is that people can see how a call comes to somebody that, "Oh, this piques my interest. I'm going to look into this a little more." At the same time, looking into something else like acupuncture, and then realizing, no, that's not it. And then it's sort of your pathway kind of unfolds as you go. Yeah. So then, Susanne, you went and did it, and it was a snap, and you got it. Rubber stamp. I have my PhD. Is that how it went?
Not really. No, it was hard. I think, well, any study that you do alongside running a business and being a parent,
yeah,
it's hard.
Yes.
I don't think I had really understood what it would be like. And maybe that was a good thing, because maybe if I had, I might not have done it. But I think, you know me, I'm optimistic about most things. And I just think, I thought, oh, well, it will be fine. How hard will it be is my classic comment about most things. But it was hard. I think it took me 8 years. Which is kind of normal actually for a part-time PhD. It takes anywhere between 6 and 8. It took me 8 the whole time, but actually I was there for 9 because I had to take a year off. I think in about year 6 of the 8, I had to take a year off.
I think that's so important to talk about, if you would, because it's like such an example of self-care, what you did, and that people have to know. It's helpful to know that this is something they can do too. If you would explain about your year off.
Yeah, so it was about the January of the year 6. So and I wasn't enjoying it anymore. I was finding it really hard. I had finished doing the research, so I'd finished going out and collecting the data. I'd done the reading in terms of the literature review and all of that. The next step was to write the thing, and it's 80,000 words thesis, and yeah.
Yeah, so let's just let that sink in. And I think you showed it to me when we last talked.
Yeah, I'll wave it. Let me wave it.
Wave it in the air so we can see the product of this. Oh my stars, look at that. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. And the title I had, but you can probably, Digging the Dirt, an archaeology of stories of change, history, and identity in a transforming organization. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. All right. But now we're back to, you hadn't written it yet. And
No.
you were feeling what? Stuck.
I think really stuck. I think I had a really bad case of writer's block, and awful feelings of being an imposter, which I had really struggled with throughout. So, I have a degree, so I've got a Bachelor of Science, but I did that when I was, 18, and this was a significant amount of time later. And throughout, there was a voice in my head constantly telling me I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't write academically. I didn't understand things. There were lots of things. I had to do a series of lectures about research methods to learn how to do it. And I'd sit there in the lectures and think, I don't understand any of this. I was having to write things down and look them up when I got home. And I found that really hard. And I think at that point, it had got too much for me, and I couldn't see how I could continue. And I thought, I either need to stop for a bit, or I'm just going to stop altogether and walk away. And I knew I didn't want to do that. So I had to stop in a kind of planned way. So I went to see my supervisors and I said, I just can't do this at the moment. I need to take a leave of absence. And so I did for a year. And during that time, I got myself a coach, Rebecca, who we just worked together on how I was feeling, and trying to understand why I was feeling as I was, and dealing with this feeling of being an imposter. And at the end of that year, I felt ready to go back. And I remember going back. So it was an academic year rather than a year. So in the September of that year, I appeared back at university again. And my two supervisors said to me, "Oh, we didn't think you'd come back." They couldn't imagine that I could, because it was so, I wasn't behind, but I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. I wasn't writing the way I should, but it made the world of difference. And genuinely, if I hadn't taken that time away, I know I wouldn't have finished. My supervisor said the writing that I was doing when I came back was so much better. I just felt freer. I just was ready to do it. And so it was, it absolutely saved the day taking that year off. It was hard to do. Yeah. It felt like a real admission of failure at the time. Right. But it was the right thing to do.
Must have been hard to go and say, I can't do this and I need to take time. But so on the heroine's journey, we identify these moments of great stuckness as there's a dragon in your path breathing fire. And it sounds like you worked with your coach to try to identify what the heck is getting in my way. And it sounds like definitely also this imposter syndrome was part of that. But can you, what was the dragon for you, do you think? What was the fear, or what made it so impossible to go on?
It was the fear that people would laugh at what I had done.
Yeah.
So that was it. That's where I got to with my coach, that I was absolutely petrified of all this stuff. All the research I'd done was in my head, and I hadn't shown it to anybody. And I was really good with that. And I knew I'd done some good research, and I knew I'd found some interesting things, but I hadn't actually had to tell anybody. And so the idea of telling people my work, was absolutely petrifying to me, that they would laugh. And I mean, it's ridiculous because of course they wouldn't, but that was my huge fear.
It's not, because I bet I can't, maybe everybody listening and people not listening, it's such a common thing. I went through it. It's such a bunch of baloney, but that's what we believe in. Those voices in your head are telling us that it's ridiculous. And we listen, we think they know what they're talking about. But then now what can you say to those voices? What have you learned about yourself?
So I think, I still have them like everybody does, but I think I have a different story now to tell, which is that I thought that, and then I realized that it wasn't true. And so I went and did my research and presented it anyway, and nobody laughed. And so actually, people really liked it. And so I think now when I get a similar feeling when I'm doing something new, I can kind of go back to the, this and go, it's fine.
Right. But I bet, because I've heard this and I've experienced it, even though this has happened and you have proved to yourself you're not an imposter and you did it and nobody laughed and you are an academic and all of those things, as you go forward into new journeys, those feelings come back and we forget sometimes what we've done. And often when I'm coaching women, I have to remind them, yeah, but remember when but we do. I don't know. I guess it's just part of our culture, society, something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I kind of learned during all of this, definitely through conversations with my coach, is that this work was different to work I'd done before. So, when I was at school, I was really good. I was academic, I was the kind of good girl in class. And I'd gone through my whole life doing that and being right about things. And I realized with this, that it's not about being right. It's about presenting something that makes sense. And what I really struggled with was showing my supervisors things that I didn't think was finished. But actually, the whole point of the academic process is you show things to your supervisors and to your fellow academics and get their feedback. And I just wasn't used to working in that way. And so I really struggled to show things to people because I didn't feel like they were done. And so it was kind of that, you don't have to be right. It doesn't have to be correct. You just have to show where you're at and then go, well, I'm not done yet, but I'm almost there. And that's okay.
And I would say to you, the mark of a real heroine is the willingness to go out there and chart a path and know that sometimes you will be wrong and you will make mistakes, and you'll go to that supervisor and they'll say, okay, here's the feedback. This doesn't make sense. And you take that in, but you keep going. And, you really were out there forging a new path. Yeah,
definitely. And I think the other thing I realized, which helped, was that I had this fear of not being an academic. Well, actually, I'm not. I'm a practitioner, I'm a consultant, and I have that experience, which people in academia don't have. So I'm just coming at it from a different angle. And so once I got comfortable with that, in that, I'm not an academic, I've got a foot in both camps, and that's good. That makes me me. And once I was all right with that, then the writing came a lot easier because I could write it in a way that felt true to me. And I wasn't trying to fit myself into the academic way. And actually, the whole chunk of one of the first chapters of my thesis is me explaining to the people reading it, to the examiners, I'm writing this in a certain way, and this is why. And because it's who I am, but also because I feel like it's important to have an authentic voice, and that's my voice. I'm following the academic protocol, but I'm not writing it in an academic way because I don't want to. So that was how I did it.
So that must have been freeing, because you were saying, this is who I am, and being okay with that, where maybe at the beginning you were thinking you were going to have to sound more academic or be more right. So that's another thing the journey, I think, teaches us to be more who we are. Yeah. So the imposter syndrome, which so many people, particularly women, run into, what advice could you give us about dealing with that?
I think for me, what I've learned is to notice it when it happens. So I think often, we all have conversations with ourselves in our heads, don't we? And we don't notice that it's happening. And I think for me, once I started to notice it, then I was able to challenge it a bit more. And my coach really helped me with of kind of questioning it. So when I'd say to her, oh, well, I think everyone will laugh at me, the first question she would say is that true? And I would say, no, probably not. And of course, that immediately takes the legs off of that feeling, that fear. So that's how I do it now, is to really notice what I'm feeling, and then to really ask the question of it, is that true? And that's what I do.
Bring it out, acknowledge it. It's not as scary as when you keep it inside. Yeah.
And the other question I ask myself is around what's the worst that could happen? And then I think about that, and then I say, well, could I survive that if that happened? And then usually the answer is yes. Then you can move on.
And probably during that time when you were questioning, should I keep going, you probably thought to yourself, okay, if I put this aside and stop, what's the worst that could happen? I would still be living. I'd have my business, my family. Yeah. Yeah. I know several people who have written and have gotten to that first draft and then put it aside.
Yeah.
For those reasons, people will laugh at me. It's not good. Yeah. So go ahead.
Writing is hard, and I found it harder than I thought I would, because like a lot of people, I write all the time for work, but it's different. This felt very personal, and it felt very exposing, and made me feel quite vulnerable. And I think for a lot of writers, I think writer's block is just that. It's the fear getting in the way. And actually, once I just started writing, my supervisor said, the Pomodoro technique, where you set an alarm and you write for 5 minutes and then you stop. Just do that. Just write for 5 minutes, even if it's drivel. It doesn't matter. And of course it isn't. You write and it's fine, and then you do another 5 minutes and on and on. And so it was having the courage, I suppose, to start. And then once I started, I was fine, and it was just flowing out of me. But it was that feeling of taking what was inside and putting it out there for the world was quite intimidating.
Right. So true. And my mother was an English teacher. She taught for many years, and her same technique was, she would say to me, just get it out, get it on the paper. Don't care if it's right or what it looks like or anything. And then look at it the next day and see what you think. And it always surprised me the next day that, it wasn't as bad as I thought, so just getting it out. Yeah. And of course there's many, The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron. I mean, there's many like the Pomodoro technique to help you with this. Yeah. So you got your PhD, you celebrated, you felt that freedom to be yourself, that you had put this major piece of who you are and your thinking out into the world, which is the heroine crosses the return threshold, shares her knowledge with the village. And so if I asked you about the gifts, the major gifts, as you look back of that journey that you received, Susanne, you would say what?
So I think it's given me a new direction, I think, in my work. So I always had a foot in both camps. So before I started my PhD, I'd done some HR consulting and some change consulting, and I always did a bit of both. Since I finished my PhD, I kind of made the conscious decision, well, I've done all that now, so I should probably focus on organisation change and storytelling. And what's happened since then is that's what I've been doing. And so it's like my attention has been focused in that area, and so the universe has given me things to do in that area. And so that's been really great, and it's given me that focus. It's given me something really interesting to talk about with people. But I think also it's just given me that level of confidence that I can do something like that and I can finish it. I have a real reputation amongst family and friends for not being good at finishing things, which is true. But this I did. And so it's kind of given me a sense of, do you know what, I can finish things. And so this reputation I have as not being very good at finishing things, I can do things.
Yeah, I think you proved them wrong for sure. Yeah. So then I think that you have, last time we talked to me about the inklings of maybe another call coming up for you that is sparking you again.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's really difficult. So I think when I first finished study, the next question that people always said is, well, when are you going to write a book? And that was the question. And I had different advice. So some people said, oh, well, just turn your thesis into a book, take out the academic references and turn it into a book. And I sort of toyed with that for a while. But a bit like being an acupuncturist, it didn't feel quite right. I thought, if I'm going to write a book, I want it to be a really good book, not just me rehashing my thesis. And so at the start of this year, I did like a writer's retreat where over a period of 10 days, we drafted a book proposal, which was just amazing. It was such a good experience with a lady called Alison Jones, who just is brilliant at what she does in terms of pulling out of your head what you might want to do. But at the end of that process, I really enjoyed writing the book proposal. But then I felt like that was enough. I didn't want to do anything with it, and I sort of thought a lot about why that was. Was it because I was afraid again of kind of putting something out there? Was it just that I'd had enough of writing, I didn't want to do any more? And I think it's the latter. So I feel like I did a lot of writing, and now I don't want to do any more for a while.
Interesting. And so that voice that had been saying there's something I want to do more with this has kind of quieted.
Well, it's kind of gone in a bit of a different direction, probably even since I spoke to you last. So the idea of the book is still there, and I had an idea for a title, so I wanted to talk about untangling the mess of change, because organisation change is really messy, and I think organisations try and make it rigid and put a structure around it, and you can't, and that's why it's difficult. So I sort of had that idea in my head. I even went off and bought some website names things, so I went quite a long way down the road. So that's still there bubbling under, but I've kind of got this new idea now, which is something's been pecking at me for a while, about creativity and wanting to be more creative. So I was asked to write something last year about how stories can help organisations become more innovative, and I really enjoyed doing it. And so that's what's piquing my interest now, is to do something around creativity. I've been asked actually to join, be part of the teaching group on some creative writing workshops, and so I think this is like a slightly different direction now, but it's kind of the breadcrumbs are leading me down this road of creativity. I don't know where yet.
And you're so good at following the breadcrumbs, which I think that's the process, is you follow and your point that you made earlier, that you said sort of casually, when you focus on something or when you're looking into something, the universe starts sending you things your way. And yeah, I think that happens. I think it does. Yeah. So, well, we'll see where that goes. And that sounds very interesting. And I guess just if you can do this in a short summary kind of way, for people thinking, well, I wonder how Susanne does use stories in an organization, what would that look like?
So I do a variety of things. So, and actually it might be good if I talk about some projects that I've worked on, because that kind of brings it to life a bit. Okay. So before Christmas, I was doing some work with an organisation where they've got a new strategy. They want their leaders to communicate it in a way that's really engaging to their people. And so they came to me and said, do you think we could use stories to do this? And I said, yes. And so the work that I was doing was working with the leadership group to help them build their storytelling skills, first of all, and to kind of understand why stories are so amazing, and how the brain reacts to a story rather than to a series of facts. So, the research shows if you as a listener listen to a story versus the same information given in a series of facts, you'll remember about 7 times as much of it from a story as from facts. So if you're trying to tell people something, telling a story is a really good way of doing it. So the first bit was kind of, I suppose, proving to this group of executives why stories are good and why they should be interested. And then I did some work with them on building their skills. So we took the strategy and I got them to tell me about it in a story rather than just showing the PowerPoint slides. I used the work of Noel Teachy quite a lot, so the leadership point of view that he does, which is all about having a story about why you're a leader and how you got into it. So I worked with them to develop their own leadership point of view that they could then tell to their teams to give them an insight into who they are. So that's one of the sorts of projects that I do. And the other sort of thing that I do is working with organisations who are going through change to help them build stories into things like their communications and to the training that they might be doing to support people through change. Because it just works. The human brain is attuned to stories, and you know, it just works. People get it, and they remember things, and they're more engaged. And so yeah, that's how I tend to use it.
Yeah, and I would say it's more fun. It's so much more
Yeah.
interesting. You're not zoning off bullet after bullet on a slide. You're hearing something so much more interesting. Well, good. That's helpful, and I know people will appreciate knowing more. And boy, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where your breadcrumbs are going to take you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I've learned that when it's the right thing, you know. And so, you know, the book I thought was the thing I wanted to do, and it might still be a thing I want to do, but right now it's on the back burner because once I'd done the book proposal, I felt like I'd done it, if that makes sense.
Wow.
I didn't want to write anymore.
And it seems to me that you're transitioning yourself, and wherever you end up, it will be a whole different book than what you
Yeah.
thought, you know, so it remains
Yeah.
to be seen. Yeah. So I know we're getting to the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you the final question. Here, people have been listening to you, and you've shared so much good information. I mean, even just the tool of when you're in those places that you're still slogging through your journey to do a vision board and put pictures of where you want to go at the end is such a good thing. You know, I'm thinking I need to do that here in the office. But what do you want most for people to take from what you shared with us today?
So I think it's, for me, I had this period of time, because it took me quite a long time to do my PhD. I had various moments when I wished I'd started it sooner, because when I started, no one really seemed to be talking about storytelling, particularly in business. There was a bit of it going on, but not a huge amount. By the time I finished, there was loads, and I started to think, oh, maybe I've missed the boat here, maybe I've been too late. And my supervisor said to me, actually, if there's lots of noise about the topic that you're writing about when you finish your thesis, it's a really good thing because it means it's topical. So that kind of reassured me, but I still had this kind of feeling like, oh, I wish I'd done this before. I wish I hadn't taken 8 years. I wish I hadn't taken a year off, you know, etc., etc. And actually looking back on it now, I think I realise it was the right time for me. And I know for sure if I had done my PhD when I was younger, it wouldn't have been as good, because I didn't have the life experience. It didn't feel like such a luxury. You know, there's something quite luxurious when you're a bit older in kind of throwing yourself into study. And when I did my first degree, I loved it. I loved university, but I didn't appreciate it for what it was, because everyone I knew did it. Everyone went to university, so it was just normal. Whereas this was not normal, and it felt really amazing to be on campus and to go to the library and all that stuff, which, you know, I just loved it because it felt like something special for me. So I think looking back on it now, I know that it was the right time for me to do it. The outcome was better. If I hadn't taken a year off, it wouldn't have been as good. I know it wouldn't. The writing wouldn't have been as good. I wouldn't have liked it so much. So I wouldn't have gotten to where I needed to get to if I had done it sooner. And actually, that's quite a nice realization. And linked to that, this idea of sort of stepping back for a bit felt like a failure. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never had to say, I can't do this. I'd always said, I can do this. But it was great to do that, and it was the right thing to do. And that's been quite a nice learning as well.
Right. It's kind of letting people know wherever you are on the path, it could be it probably is the exact right place for you to be. And you just can't see it now because of your vision isn't where it's going to be when you're done. And now you, Susanne, looking back and see it turned out, it unfolded just the way it should. Hooray. Yeah. Well, I can just want to congratulate you. It's just such an accomplishment, really, really. And for people listening who are considering something and thinking, I could never do that, please take to heart what you've heard today from Susanne, who said to, you know, at the beginning, I can't do a PhD. And here she is. Yeah. So, well, brava yet again.
Thank you.
And so, of course, we're going to have information about you in the show notes that go with this, but anything, the best place to get in touch with you, people want to hear more, or maybe they didn't quite catch what you had to say because of your most charming, lovely English accent. They can contact you how?
So have a look on my website, which is feldsparconsulting.com. The podcast is Change Stories, and that's on the website, but it also has its own website, which is changestories.co.uk. Or look me up on LinkedIn, Susanne Evans, Susanne with an S, not a Z.
Right, right. And she's Susanne, not Susanna.
It's very confusing.
Okay, well, again, what a delight to be with you. And I can't wait for the next time that we're together. Thank you so much for doing this, Susanne.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
And everybody else, I hope that you will keep listening to stories from heroines on their journey. And until the next time, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the podcast for Real Life Heroines with Susanna Liller. We're so glad you've joined us and would love to connect with you outside of the show. To find more about Susanna and how she can assist you in your heroine story, go to susannaliller.com/blog or find us on social media and YouTube by searching Susanna Liller. You can also email us directly at susanna@susannaliller.com. We'd love to hear from you. To be encouraged and inspired outside of the show and blog, check out You Are a Heroine, a retelling of the hero's journey written by your host and coach, Susanna, available on Amazon. Until the next time, be well, heroine.